There's a leak that's occurred above this garage quite some time ago, and I've got a call to come and fix it before the house is going to market, and it needs to be perfect, so it doesn't scare off any potential buyers. I'm going to show you in this video how I fixed this in a couple of hours and not days. So the first thing you want to do is see what thickness of plasterboard was used, and in this case it's the most common one used here in Australia, which is 10mm. To begin, I'm going to remove this area of cornice so I can start my repair right at the edge and cut out the damaged section. Working from the corner allows you to measure off the wall so you can get a nice square cutout. You can either aim to cut it on the timber ceiling joist, or you can just start and finish anywhere and just float some timber backing, with the majority of the weight still being fixed to the timber framing. There's a few ways you can cut out the ceiling, with either a knife, a jab saw, but I do these repairs all the time, so I use what I believe to be the best tool for the job, and that's a Makita drywall saw. Its effortless cutting and vacuum attachment really eliminates the dust when cutting out drywall repairs in customers' homes. The easiest ways to get a perfect cutout for small patches up to this size is to just get your piece of drywall slightly larger than the damaged area you want to remove and put it to the ceiling or wall and just trace around it with a pencil. You want to have minimal gaps so it dries quicker. Larger pieces require a helping hand, but luckily I have my drywall sheet lifter, which I absolutely love. Because you can do any size repair or new ceiling yourself. If you want a tool that's built to last, it's worth getting a quality one like I have, which is made in the USA. So once you have marked out with your replacement piece, just cut along the lines, and if you're using a saw or knife, it's always good to cut out a small inspection hole. So you can stick your head, or even just a camera into the space to find out if there are any cables that could possibly get cut during the process. Once it's all cut out, you want to remove any old nails or screws from the framing, and then you add some timber backing around the perimeter so the entire patch is screwed up and fixed in place correctly. If you haven't properly removed and cleaned back the framing, you're not going to get your drywall plasterboard sheet flat, and you can also cause damage to the sheet if you try and force it. I even like to add extra screws outside our repairs in case during the process the existing sheets have loosened or are not completely fixed to the framing. It's also good practice to cut the timber tight and use long screws to fix the additional framing in place, or use a framing nail gun like I'm using here instead of floating pieces where possible. If the existing sheet isn't entirely flat, you can add additional screws to it, leaving the screw heads out along the framing and doing them up gradually together, as you might find adding one screw at a time isn't enough to stop the sheet from falling away from the single screw. You have more of a chance of stopping it coming away from the framing if you do a line of them. As you're going along, you want to make sure all of your screws are just sitting under the surface, so carefully use one of your blades to scrape over the areas to make sure nothing is in the way. Once you have the compound mixed up and you're applying it, you don't want to have any unnecessary things to do once your compound is starting to set off. So now it's time to lift the replacement plasterboard into the area to make sure it fits correctly. Once I'm happy with it, I'll take the sheet away one last time to add some stud adhesive. In Australia, stud adhesive is used on regular ceilings and walls. However, it's not to be used in special fire-rated applications, behind walls where it has tiles, or at all on the outside of your home. In this case, you just use more screws. Once it's glued, you can put the new sheet back in place and begin screwing. Because you have fastened the existing perimeter, it's easy to see where the framing was to put the screws on the new sheet. Make sure you've screwed up all the areas before continuing to the next step. Once you have enough screws in place, the sheet will hold itself and you can finish screwing. Now I have mixed up some compound and it's time to tape in the joints. I always use chemically setting compounds for the taping process, and that just means it's a powdered form and you add water. It dries so much faster than anything pre-mixed, and I believe it's stronger. I also use fiber fuse instead of paper tape, and I especially don't use fiberglass mesh tape. Typically I use a 6-inch blade to tape in with and coat the joints. Then I use a larger blade to go over the top and smoothen it out. Fiber fuse is especially handy if you are just starting out. Be it you have large gaps in the repair that need pre-filling, or you don't apply the compound consistently, covering the joint, and you get a bubble under the paper tape. Fiber fuse doesn't bubble whatsoever, so if you do struggle sometimes with paper tape bubbling, pick up a roll of fiber fuse on your next repair. For small repairs like this, you can and will be waiting for the first coat to dry, which is why I use plaster accelerant. This makes the material dry really quickly in order to get another coat on sooner. If you're really tricky like I am, you can use the same batch of material you already mixed to do the second coat. Then if you do that, it just means the third and final top coat can be applied sooner. I've been doing these repairs for years and done hundreds and hundreds of these repairs and never had an issue doing it this way. I will mention that if you're painting it the same day, which is possible, make sure each coat is dried properly before the next coat goes on. I always use a large fan and even a hairdryer to make this happen. What also helps if you have a plank to work from. At the moment, I'm just working off a small step ladder here, which makes everything take a bit longer and with more effort going up and down the ladder. Over the years, I've tried to improve my efficiency in these repairs because they make up more than half of all my work I do. I think I have a little niche in the market for these kind of repairs because I also do the painting. So when you're coming back to sand, I normally have all the floor protection and furniture protection already out to catch the dust. Instead of just leaving once it's sanded, we apply the undercoat and the top coats, and I take the painter's money on the same day as well. If you're thinking of starting a business this way, it's these kind of repairs you should learn to do first because they are very common and they won't be fixed by robots or AI anytime soon. The startup costs are very low compared to other trades. You only really need hand tools to start, and maybe a sheet lifter, a trailer for transporting the drywall and removing the rubbish. It's a practical skill to have, with most homes containing this paper-faced gypsum board, also known as drywall, and in Australia we call it plasterboard. Now that our patch is taped in and I'm finishing up the second coat, it's time to start the cornice. This is where it got a little bit tricky. I've actually measured and cut the cornice too long, and I'm struggling to get it to fit into place. On each end, I've applied cornice cement to the edges, but it's too long to go in, and I nearly lose this piece of cornice. Like I said, this is off a single step ladder, and I don't have the reach to bow it into place. So I take it down and cut a small amount off, so now it fits. It's created a bit of a mess, and it's wasted some of my time, but I'm just happy it's up there and I didn't break that piece. Always important to measure and double check everything before putting the cement on it. It can get stressful because this cornice cement dries. It's very hard to scrape back or move anything, and you'll have to start again. I'm just adding some screws to hold it into place in the correct position while the cornice cement dries. I don't want it to fall down in the meantime. Before it does dry, you want to scrape back any excess cornice cement and also fill the corners and joins. Next, you want to use a wet sponge to remove any excess material your blade or your fingers may have left behind touching the cornice. Now that the cornice is up, we are onto the top coat. Scrape back the joints using a blade, which gets rid of the start and stop lines and any breadcrumbs, as I like to call it, on the joints. It also lets you see where you may need to lay on the material thicker in certain areas. This top coat material is a specially formulated pre-mixed compound which is designed to sand back easily. It should overlap the previous coats by a couple of inches either side. Once sanded, it should blend perfectly into the existing surface. But not all top coats are as good as each other. In my experience, some top coats leave bubbles when it's drying, especially if you are coating over a surface that has already been painted. In theory, the wider you make this top coat, the flatter the joints will appear to be, so sometimes you may need to spread it right out to get that flat finish. Make sure you have all the areas coated and allow it to dry before sanding. Sanding is especially important because it's the time when you can buff out any imperfections like the start and stop lines left from hand tools, and you get that good blend around the edges. Sanding is an integral part of achieving a seamless drywall patch when it's all said and done. As well as a good quality undercoat, it's required to be rolled on, and it will help blend your drywall patch, so make sure you don't take a shortcut when painting it either. I hope this video helped you, and I just wanted to share some of my experiences when doing these repairs. I hope it works out for you. Ask me anything in the comments and I will see you back at work.
When you had Trump on your podcast, it's a fascinating listen, but what did you make of him when you were interacting with him one-on-one?
One of the things about when you do business with when you're communicating with a business